what do any of you do to try and expose yourself to different points of view? You might be looking at elections, obviously something that happens right now, but
I read right-wing columnists who I can handle, Andrew Coyne and David Frum, and I seek them out to make sure that I am grounded. And I guess I trust that ideology, or not, partisanship is not being a part of what they're talking about, and I try to balance myself a little bit that way. I'm sure I'm not terribly balanced though.
Why did you decide to do that?
Just in case I'm wrong. I don't want to be wrong. I want to make sure, there's larger stakes, I feel, since I've had children, that I want to be right on issues and be effective in my upbringing of them. So I choose to seek out what the other sides of the issues are, and sometimes I'm quite persuaded, yeah. Or at least I'm opening up my mind a little bit.
I think that's important. I know I do that on social media. I try to follow people that challenge my viewpoints or have the opposite viewpoints of me, and then I try to bring people into my circle that I can have really great discussion, healthy discussion about items because they challenge and they have different viewpoints, and they're able to have a conversation about that without getting heated and bringing emotion into it.
Yeah, it's basically respecting each other's opinion. So, and challenging yourself to listen. It's not basically you talking a lot, but listen as well, and be a team player as well.
Definitely looking at different opinions and reading different perspectives. I'm sure as everybody read in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report, there was unfortunately a lot of talk around the term used of genocide. So since then I've actually been reading more about the Holocaust and reading more books related to that, just because I felt it was important to really fully understand. So some of the autobiographies of people, I've been reading those, and I find it really helpful to consider that more broadly.
What's your advice to someone who wants to, I guess, open up their mind to different points of view, or as James said, the other side of maybe your own views, to have a better sense of what people are thinking, or maybe challenge your beliefs?
I think a lot of people would say go talk to people. I think
it's hard though, right?
Yes.
Like we're doing that. We've manufactured that tonight. But
yes, I think it's important to listen. And often when we're trying to engage and learn something different, if we go into it with like our page already written of this is who I am and this is where I'm coming from, it really puts up a wall to hearing somebody else. So sort of being able to leave yourself behind and check that at the door and really be open to listening, which of course is, it's a good social work skill too.
Yes, that's right.
I am terrified to do it though.
Yeah.
I'm a fine arts graduate who is an environmentalist who has a bunch of family that lives in Alberta, and they're all in the oil industry. And I have family here who works in the oil industry. And all my family is dead who raised me. So they're terrified to bring it up. I'm terrified to bring it up. We skirt around things like Thanksgiving dinner is a tightrope walk for everybody. Yeah. And I don't like to see it on the internet. I have a fight-flight reaction when I see something, a meme or something that's not fair, which most of them aren't, from either side, mostly. But yeah, it sets me off, and I don't want to be set off. I don't want to have that anxiety feeling which fills me. I just want to flow through my day and not feel that. So I actually actively avoid it for that reason.
Well, we've created, like, headline anxiety is a thing, and we've created as a society with that need for always having the next thing to come up, and we need to be grabbed. Our attention has to be grabbed. So headlines are getting crazier and crazier. It doesn't necessarily depict what the article is about, but it needs to grab you, because otherwise, if that doesn't grab you, you move on to the next thing. And yeah, there's a lot of people that experience exactly what you just said, and their heart rate goes up. And I was listening to actually CBC, and they were saying that the way that he deals with it, he's a therapist, he hugs his wife. So he'll read the news and then he goes and hugs his wife because he needs that calming social connection aspect afterwards to cope with it.
That's not our intent, I can tell you. It's like a hug your wife after this article warning at the bottom. Yeah, there you go.
Tweet later.
Yeah. I know that as a reporter, your thing is find the other side of the story. And that's easier said than done because a lot of times there's multiple sides. It's not just one or the other. Like, everyone has a different opinion, there's nuance to it. And I feel like I've had conversations with different people in my line of work who say nuance is missing. So we have, you're on this side of the issue, you're on that side of the issue. This is the party you support, or you support this party. People within those parties, I know, believe things that maybe the stereotype of their party doesn't believe, right? What can we do, as individuals, to find that nuance in the story, to encourage people to think of something, not just pro or against?
So can I bring up last night's debate in
Yeah,
response
no,
to
go
that?
ahead. Yeah, there's very little rule here.
So I think the focus of the conversation was on climate change, which is important. But what I have seen, especially living in a very rural area, is that, when we have this running around the sky is falling approach to it, that instead of actually coming to the table and saying, what is our end goal? We want to create a better world for the next generation. I want my kids to have a better world than I have right now. I want to, do what I can to lessen my footprint, to lower emissions. But when we have that fight or flight, bring that into it, that it's a disaster and we may or may not be able to save things, then people fight about that. So then the issue is lost. So I think if we can, from all sides, our political leaders, people in the news, us as citizens talking about these items, try to bring it to the end point and not necessarily just fight over how we're going to label it or get there.
The language, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
the genocide, that was a big political issue, right?
Yes.
Whether we're putting a label on something,
Right.
and that can just get people up right away, and that was almost a conversation
Most
stopper,
of our
right?
discussion is online, right?
Yes, yeah.
So there's no nuance online. Have you been online?
Oh, yes.
7% of communication
It
is
lacks
text.
nuance. There's no nuance.
Yeah.
Our former premier lacks nuance. I advocate for electric cars because I've been driving one, and he goes on Twitter and says things like, yeah, but your plastic in your car was made out of oil, so I guess you're screwed. There's no nuance that way. You can't say anything without somebody trying to nitpick it. And by the way, it's recycled in cars. All plastics are it's, for what it's worth, not that anyone cares.
That's nuance, though. That's the nuance you're talking
There's
about.
your nuance,
Yeah.
sure, but no one, they just want to win. It's all about winning. Each side wants to win. I'm right and you're wrong, and no one's going to walk away from a fight. Everything's a fight. My issues are environmental, and I'm completely baffled as to why they're political in any way. People can have different approaches, fine, but don't argue if it's real or not. Don't argue if scientists are lying or trying to make money, or if 16-year-old girls are bought out by billionaires somehow. Don't create conspiracy theories. Because we're not going to discuss anything if people are making stuff up.
I wanted to get back.
I miss policy discussion. I would be happy to hear the other side, another policy discussion. That doesn't happen anymore.
I want to get back to a point you made earlier about not bringing this stuff up at the dinner table. We've all prepped you don't know this, for Thanksgiving this weekend.
Yes.
So you can hopefully take what you've learned here back to your own table over turkey, and no throwing gravy.
I'm going to be a headline if I bring it up.
Splash you the headline I've learned, so my boss is over there.
Start writing it out.
My headline's just going to be like, ah! So I'm going to click on that. Please read the article. We're doing it here, and I know at this table there's different views. What's a way to, do we have to go person to person, one-on-one? Is it,
First of all,
it's hard to do it in a big group, right? It's hard to do it at a table. People don't want to have those conversations. You say online is where we're spending a lot of our time. Everyone's on their phone. Kids are on the phones.
Can I ask you this, though?
Go for it.
Were we in this situation before Facebook and Twitter and social media and onlineness? I don't know how old you are, but I don't remember it being like this.
Yeah, I'm 37. I'm okay with saying that. I would say that I notice it more. It's also the line of work I'm in. Like, I cover politics, so I'm hyper aware of
You
everyone's
probably can't
position.
do anything without somebody criticizing you. 50 people.
Oh, for sure, but I
telling
don't
you-
care. That's on the other issue. Like, I don't care. People are going to label you one way or the other. There's preconceived notions of everyone at this table. That's why we did our little intro. There's a preconceived notion of me as a white guy from Regina working for CBC. If I worked at CTV or if I worked at whatever, pick Globe and Mail, there's going to be different things that go along with me that I'm just, I don't let that label me, whoever someone else to label me, I don't let that bother me. That's not going to affect my work at all. But I do think that there is this rush to get the next headline. And it's not from the news necessarily as much as it's from someone trying to get one over on somebody else, right? There is an aspect of winning, which I think eliminates a lot of the good discussion people can have, because they're not going to sit down and say, let's talk about that policy. Let's sell me on it. Because you have 240 characters, or you have a Facebook post, right?
But also, if you come to it with the intent to win, you're not there to have a conversation.
That's right.
I think social media also is sensationalizing everything. Like, you'll have two problems now. News being sensationalized, candidates questioning their sincerity towards a certain issue, the totality of their campaign and their platform. So we don't know the truth anymore, actually.
I think there's a lot of it as well where people's attention spans are shorter because they're distracted by different
Yeah,
things.
people will share something and not even have read it, but
Yes.
it just dings a bell inside them, says, yes, I agree with that, and then off it goes.
I find too, and hopefully one of the goals of this night is afterwards we can kind of mix and mingle and talk and meet different people, but you're very easily in a silo now. Like, you can be picking your Twitter feed, picking your Facebook friends, picking who you follow on Instagram, and then going home and either scrolling through your phone to that curated list of people maybe you agree with, if you're more open-minded, maybe people you disagree with, hopefully, and then you can turn Netflix on, not watch the news. You might have a news subscription at all. That didn't exist before.
I've worked with people for years, and then I find out what their political view is one day when they post something, and I'm like, I don't want to know that person. And
Raise your hand if you had that reaction. Everyone's done that.
I know, but I feel bad about it
Yeah.
because maybe maybe they're not at Thanksgiving dinner.
Unfollow. Yeah.
Yes, and I do that.
Or
because-
mute. Actually, mute's way classier.
Yes, in fact, thank God for mute. And snooze for 30 days is one of
Yes.
my favorite features. I can't. And then you stay in the bubble, and then suddenly you see what other people are saying on the other side, and it drives me crazy. Like, instantly, it's like, oh my God, this is nuts. And I really don't like it, and I'm not happy, I'm not in a good mood after I read it. And I'm surprised and in some cases horrified. Like, for the simple support of the US president. Just somebody saying, hey, he's an okay guy. Like, automatically I say, oh, racism okay, sexism okay, all these check boxes go off in my head, and I think you automatically endorse all these things that I associate with one person. That's enough to set me off.
So do you ever message that person privately and talk to them about what they've shared and why they shared it?
Oh God, no.
But would that not be a good exercise?
There's a person whom I love who posted something like, seal our borders from the homeland. And she grew up in a Christian home too, and I have a very different view, growing up in a different Christian home. Although I have very different views than my parents did. I just don't know what to say to them. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to touch it because I know that it's ingrained in them, and I'm not going to convince them otherwise. It's something they strongly believe.
But
And
do you need to, or do you just want to maybe understand why?
Okay, on certain issues, I feel like if you are closing your borders, then you are hypocritical if you call yourself a Christian, as she does. And I think, what's the point? So yeah, I do close it off because I think, what's the point? I can't convince her. She's has this view that she, and a lot of people do. We just don't normally see it. I don't think we used to see it before social media, because people would not talk politics, and you'd have to really talk to someone for a long time. And then I'm sure there's a Seinfeld episode about this. There's one about everything. And suddenly you realize the person is in real life, and what do you do? But
so the irony is that we are less sort of open or person-to-person contact about our political views. We may not share them, but we're more open online, and it's all out there for everyone to see. Which is a new phenomenon, because I wasn't walking around, 10 years ago before Facebook or whatever, with a sign on saying, "I'm this, check me out, here are my views." Like now you can just see someone on online and just make a sweeping assumption about their views. Yeah, I guess that's also getting back to people that partisanship is can be an issue too, because if someone says, "Well, I support this party," then all of a sudden you check every box that maybe that party maybe supports, and obviously that's not true.
People react emotionally, and that's the strongest reaction. And there's nothing, we can't stop it. It's because people exploit that. And
but we use emotion to make decisions. Like, we attach emotion to our decision-making process, and that's why.
I know.
What sort of stereotypes do you think people have before they start talking to you? I'll ask everyone that. When you have a political discussion, what do you think people just imagine?
Usually that I'm radical in what I would think is usually a general idea. Usually that I'm not well informed and haven't read anything but Indigenous points of view and Indigenous research or anything. And then too, just a sort of a lack of a baseline of understanding, just because there is a great big gap still in this province between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. So, yeah.
They're wrong, by the way. Ray, what do you think people think what's their perception, do you think?
In social media, I would be so silent about everything, because not that I'm famous with the community, but I don't want anybody to misquote me on something, because like now I have 5,000 friends in Facebook, so any matter that I would post, in Facebook would really be broadcasted to a lot, and you will see a lot of different reactions. So as much as possible, I don't really give any opinion on a certain matter, but I would have my own, and I would discuss it privately with my friends. And I basically I can stand with what I believe in, and sometimes I get to influence them, but it's basically respecting each other's views and opinions.
Do you talk about political things at, say, coffee or dinner with people?
Yes,
with friends?
sometimes.
You do, eh? It does come up. And do people have different opinions than you?
Yes, they have. Filipino community would be so silent. Some would be so vocal about it, but others would be just so silent and keep it to themselves.
Do you get bad reactions?
We basically react to something that really affects us directly. Yes, it is like emotion. We would react according to our emotion, but I would think that we react according to our need as well. We would believe in whatever. Let's say I need this, so I would prefer to vote this person.
And you're on social media,
Yes.
I think, more than anyone on this table. That's not a shot. It's what do you think people have? What perspective they think they have of you?
I think that would depend on the policy item I'm addressing. But one thing I have noticed on the social media side is that, especially in agriculture, I think some of what I'm putting out there and my viewpoints or my comments on things are perhaps more challenged because I am a woman saying them. I have come across that.
And what's an example of that?
Just when it comes to policy, recently we had a conversation about where we want our research to come from, the funding for our research for seed development, because it's public funded and through checkoffs, which are, when we sell grain, a certain amount of money we get for that grain goes to a checkoff program, and then they use that money for research and other things. And just, it was interesting to see what some of my friends who are male were posting and the conversations that were coming out of that versus the conversations that were coming out of what I was posting when it was a very similar threads.
Very interesting. Well, we got a few more minutes here before we're going to break off, but I want to ask, we've come up with a solution, and I think we can take these back to the tables and we'll continue our conversation. But, you mentioned you have kids. What's something that we can do as the adults, and sometimes I'm acting like it, but the adults who can make a change in our discourse and our behavior, our habits in social media? What's one thing that you would like to impress upon your kids or just the next generation in general?
My kids are ahead of me on this. My oldest son is 16 and he's starting to think about politics. He accuses me of being very partisan, and I'll mute certain people on CNN. I won't say who, they're orange. And I just say, we've had enough of that. And he says, no, Dad, you should be listening. Or if I hear somebody lying about climate change, I'll mute it. And he says, no, you should be listening to it. So I think they're ahead of me. And he's accusing me of all this partisan, blindfolded stuff. And of course he's wrong.
Why do you think that is? Why does he have?
I mean, this is, when I work with young people, they're unjaded. I'm a jaded old middle-aged man, and I'm worn down, and I've lost faith in a lot of things in the world, and he's just starting to have his eyes open to the world, and he's, good for him. I will drink his blood one day.
Good luck following that. Go for it. The bar's been set. Hopefully that's only drink blood reference.
I get really excited about kids and youth. I've spent my entire adult career working with children and youth, and very concerned about their well-being, like all children. And I'm fascinated always listening to kids talk. So my son, who's 17, came and asked me a couple of weeks ago, how come we never talk about politics? He's like, I'm in history, we're supposed to be talking about what our families talk about. You don't ever say anything. And I was like, And so I explained to him why, and some reasons. In part were that some of the jobs I've done, it's very important that I be neutral, because it's very important to be to the realities of some pieces of work, especially around doing policy and research, because I have worked within government doing policy. It is important to be neutral. So that's been important. The other piece was just, again, how I've been raised by both families, so both my adopted family and my Indigenous family. As I think about my mom in the 70s, I grew up on the American border, smack dab on the American border.
So did I.
You walk out and those are the American cows. And that's what they were called. So anyhow, at their elections, I can remember my mom being, and the only time they would ever shut the TV off, because we only got American TV, they would shut it off during their elections because those candidates did what ours do now, where they're not listening to each other, they're talking over each other. They would do things of looking for dirt on each other. And both my parents were just appalled by that and said, that's why we live here. That would never happen in Canada. And I think about now, my mother passed away last month, and I think about how horrified she'd be of listening to the news right now and watching the debate last night. And I think for all of us, being from Saskatchewan, if we think about what our grandparents and our great-grandparents and the values they had, and that's so important to think about honoring them, and that we're all from Saskatchewan, and to get back to that, and most of the country's from Saskatchewan. I think all of Alberta's from Saskatchewan. And I think about my Indigenous family, and it's the same thing. If this was a room of elders, I wouldn't speak at all. I wouldn't be, I would look to them for these questions and look to them for what they say. and entirely follow what their guidance is based on their knowledge. And we've sort of lost that, some of those basic, the basic sort of principles of being people and good to each other. So I try and do that with my kids.
I think support, I really value the way my parents raised me to have open conversation around politics and policy, and to try to encourage, I have 2 girls, to try to encourage them to feel comfortable to do the same, and to be, comfortable with their beliefs, and that's okay if they're different than mine, and to have that conversation and to know that they should do their own research and come to their own conclusion.
I always believe that each of our values basically derive from the very foundation of our family. So I really want to strengthen the family itself, because whatever we do outside of the house would be dependent on what we were brought up in during our childhood. So we will be that same value will be the same thing that will basically get us there. Whatever we post in social media, it will be based on what values we have learned from our family.
Thank you guys for the discussion, and thank you for being such a great audience. We'll take a little quick break here, and you guys can break off into your different tables and chat.
I think what struck me the most is we had a conversation about how, we talked a lot about social media, how it's influencing how we get our news, how we react to things, but that we're not really talking about what we need as humans. And when we put stuff on social media, it's out there, but it's not dealing with what we need, what our souls need, and how it's almost this negative feedback loop where we keep looking for what we need by putting more stuff out there on social media, when really we just need to connect with each other, and not necessarily just online, but to get out to things like this, to talk, to connect, and to feed that other side of ourselves as well.
Well, we were out talking, the group of 4 of us, and it was interesting listening to Ray's experience of coming to Canada, and then some of the questions that you had for him were things that I wouldn't have thought of, but really important for me to think of. And you had a comment about respect, that new Filipino people that come to Canada, that you talk to them about being respectful to other Canadians, and that really resonated with a lot of, I think, what the intent was. When I hear elders talk about the oral treaties, and what their intent was about respect, it was about sharing, and those are some very, I found that commonality very important and good, and yeah, so it's been good to hear other people's experiences.
James, you get a chance now?
I try to insert myself into the Filipino community because of the baking and the cooking. And my foot's in the door, but this is as far as I've got. I find my reaction, I'm a bit cautious still. I see people in a suit jacket, a nice suit jacket, I think conservative. And my relatives look at me with a fine arts background and think, one time I went up the ladder in my house and cleaned an eavesdrop and borrowed a ladder off my uncle, who was a farmer, and he was shaking his head. He said, I don't understand how a guy with a fine arts degree knows how to go up a ladder like that. He just could not comprehend that I was the way I was. Like, everybody had a preconceived notion of me, and that's been true through most of my life, and I hate myself for doing it with other people. It's true that there's a lot we can learn from each other, but I still find that politics, there's a reason why you don't discuss politics, why it's a golden rule. You just don't do it. Because it's always going to inflame something. You have to be very good not to be upset or have an argument. I don't see that. That wasn't how it was before social media. If you brought up politics, things went bad. And it's like that in this age too, I think. So I don't think we're ever going to get away from it. I don't think there's a magical solution for it. I wish we could come up with something for you.
Right?
We are so thankful to be here, and this is a very good venue to come out and discuss things from all walks of life, different views, and I've learned that we differ based on how we were raised, and it basically our views on politics will depend on that, and will be dependent on our emotions and our need as well. But yeah, it's respect begets respect. That's really struck me tonight, and yeah, we just be responsible for what we will write there in the ballot, and yeah, it will shape our future.
Thanks, Ray. I'll finish. I'll say that one thing I'm going to venture to do from now on is to ask people about their background, where they came from, to get a better sense of what their makeup is. I think that was a really useful exercise for us tonight. I think I would encourage everyone to do that. That will break down some of those barriers and those preconceived notions that we have about one another. And I want to just thank my panel here. You guys were awesome tonight. So I'll give you guys another round of applause for putting yourselves out there.